Welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. I'm Shane Metlin here again with Katie Harper to discuss some JMU sports. Before we get into it, please like and subscribe and follow us on all the platforms where you find this, especially YouTube. And, with that, let's start it off with, one of the popular April topics is always spring football. JMU is getting towards the end of their spring football season, about a week out from the spring game at Bridgeport Stadium. And I don't know quite if we've seen them nail down a lot of the question marks probably going into the spring, but definitely an opportunity to get to just the roster together, the new coaching staff together, and kind of get a feel for what maybe to look for and what to expect when fall camp or summer camp opens in late July or August, whenever they get going.
This general theme from this coaching staff right now is everybody's looking very good, but they're glad that they don't have to go out and play a real opponent here tomorrow or next week. It's still a work in progress, as expected. No one's going to be ready to go in the spring, especially when you have a new coaching staff coming in. But from all of the coaches that I've talked to over the last couple of weeks, they're all very happy and pleased with where this group is going, how some people are stepping up and kind of embracing new roles and kind of stepping into a leadership kind of personality, because when you think of last year's team, you think of guys like Jacob Thomas and Trent Hendrick, and they're both gone now. So this coaching staff is starting to see some of those guys kind of separate from the pack in terms of a leadership role, but overall play, it's still coming together, but I don't think that's all too surprising. But what we're also seeing and what players have told us is, they're rotating probably just as much as, if not more than, what Chesney and his staff was known to do. There isn't really, a set group of ones right now and a set group of twos. It's a pretty big flow heading into this last week of spring practices.
Yeah, and we spent plenty of time talking about new players and all the changes and everything. I guess I'm going to go a different direction here now, is because, here recently, it seems like there's been some familiar people get behind the mic after practices. I know you've written about, Jaden Mines and, him maybe possibly opportunity to break out, I guess, somebody who's been around the program for a while, but maybe we'll get a little bit more opportunity. I know, George Pettaway, somebody everybody's really familiar with, seems to be pretty happy with the new coaching staff. And obviously you talked to Brian Shore here recently, who is new, but also a familiar face, as he's back on the coaching staff after, a legendary playing career for JMU. So let's start with Mines. You wrote about him. We talked about him a little bit last week, but it just seems to be a name that keeps popping up when people talk about who's looking good this spring.
Yeah, I think it was Napier very early on. Billy Napier mentioned him and said that he's really, really been standing out to him. And obviously, Jaden Mines has played a big role on special teams as a gunner. He had that touchdown against North Carolina a couple of years ago. So, he can make plays. He just hasn't had that opportunity yet on offense. And when you kind of look at who's been around him, it's understandable why. He's kind of the body of a slot receiver. And, last year they had Jalen Sanchez kind of in that role, and Wislowski and even Mikey Scott at times. But, they even kind of, Mikey Scott actually talked with us yesterday, and he mentioned Jaden Mines of, he's built like a slot receiver, but he has shown his abilities to kind of go outside and play closer to the edge. And so it is an interesting position to see him kind of grow into, and what the coaching staff will use him at or use him for. We're not 100% sure yet, but he has gotten praise from both Napier and new wide receiver coach RJ Fleming, who, even with us in the media, he was open. He said, hey, he has great route running abilities. He has good speed, but he's like, where he needs to get better is that point of the catch. He needs to, if you go and watch film, when he's getting ready to make a catch, there's usually a body that is back on him and guarding him. So he needs to be kind of ready to make those contested catches. But even Fleming said that he's at the jugs machine every day trying to get better at that. So he's someone who's really kind of taken that step forward to be a leader and potentially break out on offense.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk so much. You have to talk so much about the players who come and go in a program these days and through the transfer portal and whatnot. But I think it's interesting to highlight somebody who has stuck around through multiple changes at JMU and really just like he's seen the wide receiver room reloaded time after time, which, the program as a whole has done each of the last 3 or 4 years. And he stuck it through it to the point where it now is looking like he's somebody who's developed over time within a program and will now get his opportunity.
Yeah, and he was very vocal when he talked to us about, he likes that he's had these different coaching staffs to learn from. He first came in under Signetti, stuck it out with Chesney, and is now having this opportunity under, Napier and Fleming for his final year of eligibility. And he's someone that Napier even joked to that he's kind of the grandfather of the team because of his age, but he has waited his turn, like you said, and that is kind of, giving him a possible opportunity. But if you look at that wide receiver room, it's loaded right now. So it's still going to be a challenging one for him. But, a challenge like that usually can help some guys maybe step up to the task and really kind of separate themselves.
Yeah. It's different but similar situation for Petaway now. Coming off a season where, he battled some injuries, didn't get the carries or the snaps like that he really probably expected or anybody expected from him last season. And now he seems like he's, we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's been written about Napier here recently, but, he called it, the kind of the chip on the shoulder program. Petaway seems to be one of those guys going into the season with a chip on his shoulder, and we know what he's capable of. How exciting is that for JMU fans that he seems to really have some motivation?
I think it should be exciting. And I mean, he said it himself that he has a chip on his shoulder, but he's also been very open to the fact that last season happened and it's in the past and he's putting it behind him. While, yes, it may fuel him a little bit, he's not thinking too much about what happened last year. But I asked him about ending the season the way he did, where he at least, he got in the end zone against Oregon and it was through the pass game. And he said moments like that do help, after the season that he had and having the limited opportunities while watching, one of his teammates who, he worked well with kind of break out and have such a great season. That's hard. But to end it for the way he did, it did give him a little bit of a push as he went into kind of that transition and getting to know, Napier and his staff. And, Napier, like you said, talks about that chip on the shoulder and you see it across the program. And there is just kind of a edge with Petaway when you talk to him. He's very methodical in the way he speaks and he's very level-headed. He kind of speaks at the same volume the whole time and he's not one of those guys that's getting too high or too low when he's talking about things, but I think that could help him too. But he's definitely one that, I think he may lower his shoulder at times and run through some guys if he gets the opportunity, just because I think there is maybe a little bit of pent-up anger with how last season went.
Yeah, and hard to say even like who the anger's directed at or if it's just a situation thing, because I mean, I think he was a guy who was going to get an opportunity last year, and then he battles the injuries, and Wayne Knight breaks through with a All-American season. Some other guys get opportunities. It was not necessarily, I think, anything necessarily that he did wrong either to like get himself down the depth chart. It was just one of those situations where you may see a guy bounce back who was on the verge of a 1,000-yard season just a couple of years ago.
I mean, 20 yards shy. Like he was at 980 rushing yards in his first year at JMU, but it is one of those things that it is just such a bummer that injuries happen. And when they happen, you can't control the situation if someone else ends up breaking out and having a really good year. And that's just what happened to Petaway, as bad as it was for his case. But he is someone now that, you look around this running back room, there's a lot of talent there, But outside of him and, Seth Cromwell, who's coming in from NAU, it is a relatively younger group there. So he's still someone that they're going to rely on early to kind of be a leader in that group. And that's a position, if he can kind of capitalize early in the season, I think you're going to see him get back to where he was during that 2024 campaign.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit too about, Brian Shore, now that we've got to hear from him this week. Obviously, I think that's just something that everybody kind of been looking forward to. Not just that he wound up back at JMU, but getting to hear from him as he takes over the tight ends, and really just is a cool story all around. But what was kind of the mood like when he spoke to the media the other day?
Yeah, I wanted to set it up kind of funny. I was vetoed. I thought it would be great if we all just kind of like acted like we didn't know who he was. Just be like, "Oh, how much did you know about the program when you agreed to join Napier's coaching staff?" However, my dream of that happening quickly ended when we were all introducing ourselves to him, and he said, "Oh, I remember Katie." I'm like, I guess I can't switch it up now and act like I don't know who he is. But I mean, if people listen to it on the radio, Dave did joke of like, I guess you knew a little bit about the school and you committed. But, hearing from him and getting back to Harrisonburg, and he said it was something he always kind of thought about. And when he was offered the job, he was offered it at 8 p.m. and he said he would have taken it right there if, he didn't have a wife and a new child to think about. And so he said he called his wife, and about a minute later called Napier back and said that he'd love to join the staff. And it was one of those things that the way he talked about it, you can still tell that he was a quarterback. Like, he's very he thinks his answers out. And so he just kind of the way he was describing it probably was a surreal moment for him to get back to Harrisonburg, but he wasn't necessarily kind of fanning over it and making it like a huge deal, but it is special for him, and it's something that he thought about for a while.
Yeah, I do always kind of wonder, like, maybe even what the dynamic's like when you show up the first day of work and nobody has to kind of like show you around the building or anything like that. Like, I'm sure some things have changed a little bit, but definitely a cool thing for him, his family, and everybody else to like get back here.
I mean, Napier even said that it's nice to have, I guess he talked about it a week or two ago. Napier said that it is nice to have a player like him or a coach like him that was a player at the school that has an understanding of the program, and that, there is a very special buy-in that Shore has to JMU, and Napier thinks that's kind of really helping this current staff and this current roster.
And I mean, when he's trying to sell a recruit on the program, you kind of got to believe what he's saying as far as like why this is a special place, why this is where you should be. It's not just, oh, this is where he happens to work right now. He's got to say this stuff. You got to believe it a little bit when he's talking about JMU as a special location, place to play.
Yeah, he lived it. And I mean, he even talked about it, he was asked about what makes JMU special, and it's something that I think we've all heard in the media now at media availabilities probably more times than we can count. But, Shore said it's one of those places that there's always someone there to help. And if you have a question, if someone doesn't know the answer, they'll find someone who knows the answer within a couple minutes. And so, yeah, it's definitely one that is an interesting addition. It's an addition I think we both kind of thought was a possibility when this coaching staff was coming together, but it's definitely one I think JMU fans are going to appreciate now for a while.
Yeah, and for spring football, JMU getting a little bit of national attention here the past week or two. There's a USA Today article about Billy Napier and kind of like hit on both his ending at Florida and his new beginning here at JMU, which has frankly brought out some big reactions from people tied to Florida. Even somebody like Andy Staples, who covered Florida and now is in the national media, kind of had plenty to say about that. And, I frankly didn't necessarily agree with what was going on with that On3 podcast, but I don't know. I'm sure there wasn't much of a reaction around the facility, at least to the media about that. But, what was your kind of reaction seeing that story and then the reaction that followed?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even talked to Napier yet since it came out. And it's weird too because I ended up writing a story about Napier being happy um about the removal of the spring portal, and I wrote that and published it, or wrote that and filed it in our system last Sunday. So I like had written it before kind of all of this stuff came out, and then people were like, "Oh man, these shots at Florida are great." I'm like, "Well, I promise I didn't write that story as a shot at Florida. It just so happened that it got published after everything else." But the reaction was just like it was a little weird, and I kind of agree with you where I didn't agree with kind of what people were taking it as. Um I think it's just true, frankly. Like, it is a unique situation for Napier where he is coming in and taking over a program that has a proven track record of success. And it has a proven track record because, you know, Bob Chesney, Kurt Signetti, Mike Houston, Everett Withers, all of those coaches left at the time for a quote unquote better job. And, it's obviously worked out for Kurt Signetti and it didn't necessarily work out for Houston and Withers, but they all left JMU in a good place. And so for Napier's part, that's different than the last two jobs he took. Florida is Florida and it hasn't had a lot of success over, the last several of years. And then, if anybody hasn't looked into kind of the situation at Louisiana before Napier got there, it was messy with kind of how the coach before him left. And so to me, seeing all of that, I'm like, well, yeah, JMU is the first school that he's taking over that has a good culture. And it was a little surprising to see kind of the anger that came from that because in my mind, as someone who's kind of covering it from just like an outsider looking in terms of like Florida and Louisiana, it's just true. And then the toilet analogy didn't even make sense with the
Uh,
plumber. Like, I'm like,
yeah,
that doesn't even make sense. You don't hire a plumber when your toilet's working. I'm like, well, JMU had to hire a coach because the
yeah,
coach left. Like, I was just like, this doesn't even make sense. So it was just like a weird one to see.
yeah. And I mean, it's like it's more of like an analogy when you're talking about the alignment, like from top to bottom. It's like if you hire a plumber to come look at your toilet and they discover that those city water mains broken, like there's not anything you can do within your house. Like if nothing from the top down is working quite right, which I mean, frankly, from everything we've heard, like that's the situation at Florida or has been. Maybe John Summerall was walking into a better situation because I'm sure nobody at Florida wants to continue to struggle in football the way that they have. But JMU just inaugurated their 7th president of all time here recently. Florida had 4 presidents while Billy Napier was the coach. Like
That's
four,
insane.
4 presidential changes. Like, I mean, how are you establishing a culture as an institution when you're going through all of that? Just from the top down, it's really difficult. And you know, I think Florida fans have a strong reaction to that because they don't want to hear like that a program like JMU could be in a better position than Florida in any regard. But it's not even like a knock on Florida or that like, hey, if Florida gets it together, they could win a national championship. We know that. JMU, like maybe getting to the playoff is the pinnacle for JMU. We don't know. But for Florida, like JMU amongst their peers, that they are going to match like what almost any group of 5 program is doing, whether it's the commitment to the program, the fan base, things like that. JMU was in a great position relative to its peers. Florida, for all success under people like Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, right now they're getting outspent by most of the SEC. They're getting outspent by most of the Big Ten, and if that's where you want to be, like that's an institutional thing. It's not to say there's no valid criticisms of what Billy Napier did, X's and O's and things at Florida, but there's a lot bigger issues than who the coach is when 4 coaches in a row come to a program like Florida and end up getting fired because they're not winning enough.
And I think you can even keep it in the same institution. And if you look at Florida and look what they've been able to do with their women's lacrosse program and how quickly that grew and how good it got, that's because like the money situation, they are pouring money into that program that it is comparative to the best Big Ten schools and the best ACC schools in lacrosse. Like, financially, that's going to match up well. I've watched videos on like Florida's lacrosse facilities for its women's team, and it is just unbelievable how beautiful that facility is. So that puts them with the best of the best in terms of women's lacrosse. That's not happening, like you said, with football. So if you're a very, very skilled player and you're getting offers from the Floridas, the Alabamas, Tennessee, Ohio State, Michigan, you're getting offers from these schools that have been in the playoff, have won a national title in the last couple of years. If it comes down to it, you're probably going to pick the school that's putting more money into its football program. And right now, like you said, it's just not Florida.
Yeah, I mean, just the bottom line is, if you're JMU, you look at it, hey, we should win the Sun Belt because we have more to offer than other Sun Belt programs. If you're Florida, what are you saying? Like, we should win the SEC when we're on par with Mississippi State, like when it comes to like what we're putting into our program right now. It really, there's a lot bigger issues. Billy Napier did not forget what he knew about coaching when he got to Florida. Like, he'd had a lot of success there. We'll wait and see what happens at JMU, but the reaction from the Florida fans and everybody, I thought was very interesting. And the Andy Staples thing too, like about like, the culture is good because of Signetti. Like that
one didn't go over well.
Yeah. Like, I mean, if you pay any attention and hey, we'll be fair. JMU fans say a lot of the same things about Everett Withers that Florida fans have been saying about Napier this week. And Withers, for, whatever problems with the X's and O's and things in the play calling on game day, like, he did things that helped establish the culture at JMU and what it is right now. So, yeah, to be fair, I think all fan bases have a little bit of that in them.
Yeah, I mean, even like Napier's talked about it too, where their approach at Florida was to recruit at the high school level. And he's admitted, and it's one of those things where you kind of admit your mistakes. And he has said it in media availability where at Florida, given the current climate of college football, they just didn't have the time to develop someone coming in as a freshman and get them to their junior or senior season. That's just not kind of the recipe for college football anymore. And it is shifting away from that. And you need to attack the transfer portal and be able to win with those guys now. And so for him, it's just it was a little bit of a different and a mistake at Florida, just kind of relying heavily on high school recruiting. And now he's open. He's saying it's going to be, you're going to bring in 20 high schoolers and you're probably going to bring in 40 guys out of the transfer portal at a school like JMU.
Yeah. The other big thing going on in April these days is basketball transfer portal stuff. Not a lot happening on the women's side. They only have a couple spots, 2, maybe 3 spots to fill. They're probably taking their time a little bit more, but I know that they've had some visits and things. The men's side is where we've seen some action here pick up here recently, as they look to fill several positions and 3 commitments here in the past few days. A couple of guards, and Garrett Sundra, his 6'11" Notre Dame transfer. We'll start with him, who's not necessarily a center, even though he's one of the tallest players the program has ever had. He's a little bit more of like a stretch 4, go up to that. Like, a lot of his shots come from 3-point range. So I'll start with him. He'll be pretty interesting addition. Not huge numbers at Notre Dame, but highly recruited coming out of high school, and could be interesting to see what a guy like that with his size and skill set can do in the Sun Belt.
I feel like adding someone that's 6'11" is never a bad idea when you're a basketball team. So
yeah,
there is that for them. But I will say, and it's not even just necessarily on him. I don't know if you've noticed it, but the reactions on social media feel drastically different than what they were a year ago with what this staff is doing right now out of the portal. Obviously 2-3 weeks ago, people are very disappointed with how many people are entering the portal, but now through 3 commitments, it seems like the energy around or from fans around the basketball program is picking up in a better position than it was last year.
Yeah, and it is interesting because Sundra, like I mentioned, he was like a top 150-ish recruit, borderline 4-star guy coming out of high school, scored like 4 or 5 points a game at Notre Dame. He was a contributor, but not a star there. One of the other ones they're bringing in is a guard, KJ Windrum. He, similar recruiting ranking coming out of high school, went to Northwestern, fairly promising freshman year, and then just got glued to the bench about midway through his sophomore year. I don't know exactly what happened there. But, similar stats to Sundra, it'll be really key to see. This isn't the first time JMU's brought in, former 4-star recruits through the transfer portal, and some of them have played really well at JMU. Some of them have not, for various reasons. So I think these are guys who should be able to contribute in the Sun Belt, but it's always going to be key to see how the fit is once they get here. But landing on guys this early in the portal does suggest that maybe these are pretty high on the priority list for the staff.
Yeah, definitely it has that feel, but like you said, I do think kind of seeing what we saw not this season, but maybe more so last season, I do think it's an interesting one to follow to see how well this group comes together because, as we've talked about after not like I said, not this past season, but the season before, there was some chemistry issue there. We've talked about it on here. And so you kind of do maybe want to have just a little bit of caution when you go into it to see exactly how these guys are going to come together and how well they will come together as a team, both on the court and kind of in the locker room and away from the game.
Yeah. And hard to say. Sundra is a Virginia guy coming home. He's from Ashburn, played at Paula Sixth up there in the Northern Virginia area. So he's somebody who I'm sure was familiar with JMU before all this. And, maybe not a huge surprise that that's someone they were able to connect with in the portal. The other commitment so far is Gage Lattimore, who is a guard from North Carolina Central, was a first-team All-MEAC player this past season. Like Windrum, he's a 6'3" combo guard. When you look at the backcourt now, you got everybody who's on the roster at this point that plays guard is 6'3" or taller, and I know they wanted to get a little bigger at the guard position. We'll see if they end up adding any more smaller guys maybe to play the point or something. But the backcourt's getting a little bit bigger, a little longer, may help defensively to have some of those guys. But Lattimore averaged about 16 points a game. He started his career at Division II, really broke out here as a sophomore last year in the MEAC. He had 29 points against JMU this past season. It was a loss for North Carolina Central, but an interesting addition there in a guy who's maybe a little bit more of a proven scorer in the backcourt and can play a little bit of both guard positions for them.
And I think that storyline has, if you look just at football, that storyline has worked out for the football program where you're bringing a guy up. It worked for Chesney. Napier has talked about wanting to bring the guys up because they kind of have that dog chip on their shoulder mentality. So, when you see that already working for someone on the basketball side, I think that's a good add in hopes that, they're going to, they're climbing the ranks a little bit, but they've shown at previous stops that they can kind of handle that jump in talent and speed of play.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed so much when it comes to just the discourse about the transfer portal stuff is there's so many generalizations that get just sweeping statements that get thrown out about it, whether it's this is why somebody entered the portal, this is the kind of guy you should get in the portal, and there are people who think well, okay, you can't take guys moving down anymore because that didn't work out in one circumstances, or you got to get somebody coming up, or you don't want somebody who played at a smaller program, or people transfer only for money. And I don't think that's true. I think every single situation is a little bit different. And notable, I think that JMU has a little bit of a mix now with what the roster looks like. We're going to see several more people come and may change how we look at the whole thing as a whole. But, right now you've got somebody like Preston Fowler, who you recruited out of high school and are keeping around for another year and probably is going to be sort of a cornerstone of what they want to try to do because he's been in the program. You've got Paul Jones, who transferred in and is staying. You got these other guys coming in from different circumstances. So, a little bit of everything with the program right now. And then you just got to see how it all ends up kind of gelling together. And I'm sure they're looking for some post players. That'll be interesting because from everything I've read, the market for post players, if you're like 7 foot and can walk, like you're going to get $3 million this year. So what they end up doing, trying to find like a center will be kind of interesting. But right now they've got great size everywhere else on the court.
I mean, for that money, I'll like learn how to walk in stilts.
Yeah.
Like, I can't really shoot a basketball. People would be really disappointed in that. But for 3 million, I'll try it. That's that's insane.
Well, because there was, when the portal, even before it's open, and you start seeing some names like a Micah Handlocken, who started at Marshall. He goes to Florida. He had a really gruesome injury a couple of years ago. But he's been at Florida. He's been a role player at Florida. He's back in the portal. I'm thinking, oh, okay, is this a guy who wants to come back maybe to the Sun Belt level and score 15 points a game and grab 9 rebounds and block 4 shots? And it's like pretty quickly you find out, oh no, like somebody like him's entering the portal because he's going to make a lot of money, even as somebody who didn't put up huge numbers in the SEC. So it'll be interesting to see, you may have a guy who's 6'11" playing on the perimeter for JMU next year with a 6'7" center. I mean, who knows? Like, it's going to be kind of interesting to see how they end up putting a lineup together once they finish what they're doing.
Picked the wrong part of this field to go into. Jeez, maybe just a few years too early heading into college. But yeah, it's. I like watching the roster creation. And I know everybody kind of has their thoughts on the transfer portal, and a lot of people tend to side on the fact that they don't like it. But it is. I think it does make it at least interesting, and if you do like the roster creation part, to see it come together. Obviously, Preston Spradlin could hear this clip and be like, absolutely not. That is a terrible take. I hate this part. But at the end of the day, it's something he has to do. But it is interesting to watch kind of from a journalist perspective to see how coaches kind of tinker with it and make it what it becomes.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd like to maybe cut it in half, like where you're adding 4 or 5 players every year.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but it does make for, and I saw it's even pointed out, I don't know, maybe with Jeff Goodman, one of the national writers had heard from a coach saying hey, if there's one silver lining, it's that our off season is creating attention for the sport of college basketball right now. And so there's a little bit of that. It does kind of rival NBA free agency almost, and where are the big name players going to go, and how are everybody going to build a roster. So it does give us plenty to talk about, because I'm sure we're going to have more on the men's basketball side to discuss, if not next week's episode, maybe the episode after that. And we'll see some commitments from women's basketball here in the coming weeks too. They'll have their roster set. We can really kind of figure out what to expect from JMU women if they're the Sun Belt favorites going into next year. I don't know on the men's side if we'll ever be able to accurately predict a favorite in this conference ever again. But we will have plenty to talk about as the spring rolls on, including heading into the spring game next Saturday and more football talk. In the meantime, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. I'm Shane Metlin, here Katie Harper again. You've been listening to Purple and Bold, JMU Sports Podcast from DNR Media and the Daily News Record. And thanks for tuning in.